Hey everyone! Welcome to We Talk English. Join me as we explore the world of news, one story at a time. We'll break down complex topics, improve your English, and have some fun along the way. Subscribe now and let's learn English together.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to China. We're looking at how Halloween celebrations there, well, they've kind of become a flashpoint. You know, it's costumes and candy mixed up with politics. It's pretty wild.
It really is.
Yeah. So we've got two sources for this one. One from the Times of India and another from the New York Times.
Yeah.
Both of them show that Halloween in China, it's not exactly the lighthearted holiday that we might be used to here.
That's right. What we're seeing is this seemingly simple celebration, Halloween, it's become this stage for some pretty deep social and political tension.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's rewind a bit to last year. Halloween in Shanghai, it was a huge party. People were dressing up, even making fun of the government and their policies. Like there were people in hazmat suits as a nod to the COVID lockdowns. And get this, the authorities actually praised this. They called it cultural tolerance. It's like they were giving it a big thumbs up.
Yeah, it does seem surprising at first, but you have to remember that 2023 was right after they lifted the zero COVID policy. I mean, after years of those really strict restrictions, there had to be some pent-up frustration.
Oh, absolutely.
So the government probably saw Halloween as this, well, as a release valve, like a way for people to let off some steam and maybe even as a chance to, project this image of openness.
Yeah, that makes sense, like a calculated risk almost. But hold on tight, because this year, things took a dark turn.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a totally different scene. We're talking full-on crackdown, police out in force. They were breaking up gatherings and even escorting people in costumes away. Can you believe that? You could be in your Batman costume and end up in the back of a police van.
Wow, that's a huge shift. What happened?
Right.
Why the sudden crackdown? Well, the Chinese government, they've become really wary of any public gathering. Any gathering at all that could potentially turn into a protest.
I see.
Remember the white paper protests in 2022 where people were demonstrating against the COVID policies? Well, those events really spooked the authorities.
Yeah, I bet.
So now they seem hyper aware of anything. I mean, anything that could become a focal point for dissent, even something like Halloween.
Makes sense. And that's exactly what the Times of India article points out. They quote a bar owner in Shanghai who was actually forced to sign an agreement promising not to hold any costume contests or Halloween-related activities. And the reason they gave? Maintaining good social order.
So Halloween went from being celebrated to being seen as a threat practically overnight.
It's a dramatic shift. And it really raises some important questions about free expression in China.
Right.
Last year, the government might have tolerated those Halloween celebrations as a way for people to vent after the lockdowns. But this year, it's like they're way less comfortable with that level of, creative expression.
Yeah, it's definitely a big change. And it makes you wonder what's next for Halloween in China and what it means for the country as a whole. Exactly. Yeah, and, for a lot of young people in China, Halloween was like this. Well, this rare chance to express themselves in a society that's, very tightly controlled. You can't just go protest in the streets, but you can put on a costume and maybe use it to make some kind of statement.
Yeah, you're right. It became this outlet almost, a way to push the boundaries a little.
Yeah.
The Times of India piece, it has this quote from a Chinese social media user. They said, even in relatively open Shanghai, the scale of freedom is constantly shrinking. It's pretty powerful. Makes you think about what it's like to live in a place where even Halloween is under so much scrutiny.
It is. And that feeling of shrinking freedom, and something a lot of people in China are feeling right now under President Xi Jinping. The government has been pushing traditional Chinese culture and values, and they often view Western influences with a lot of suspicion. So Halloween, with its very American roots, it's become a target for this kind of cultural policing.
So it's not just about controlling gatherings, it's about controlling ideas and influences too. And the crackdown this year, it was pretty intense. The New York Times reported that police, they were targeting people just for wearing costumes, asking some to take off their makeup or even change their clothes.
Wow. That kind of targeted approach, it really tells you something. It suggests that the government, they're not necessarily opposed to Halloween itself, but they are opposed to the potential for it to be used as a platform for any kind of message, any dissent,
Right.
It's all about maintaining control.
Which is interesting because Like you said earlier, those official Halloween events,
Hmm.
like at Shanghai Disneyland,
Mm-hmm.
those were allowed to continue.
Exactly.
So it seems like the government is okay with Halloween as long as it's contained and well commercialized.
Right. It's about keeping things predictable
Yeah.
and profitable.
Yeah.
This distinction between what's allowed and what's not, it highlights their desire to control not just what people do, but also what they think, how they express themselves.
Pretty deep.
They want to prevent any kind of spontaneous expression, anything that could be seen as subversive.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, Halloween this year,
Yeah.
well, it fell into that category.
It did. So this raises a big question. What does this mean in the long term? Is this just about Halloween? Or is it a sign of something bigger happening in China?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
Some analysts think this crackdown could be a warning sign, a sign that the government is getting more wary of Western cultural influence in general, and that they're going to exert even tighter control over public spaces and how people express themselves.
So we might see similar restrictions on other events too, like Christmas maybe.
It's possible. This situation also brings up a bigger question, though, about the future of cultural exchange. In a world that's so connected, yet also so divided,
A good point.
how do we balance that desire for connection,
Mm-hmm.
those shared experiences, with the realities of different political systems,
Right.
different values?
Right. Is there even room for a global Halloween? Or will local politics and interpretations always shape how we celebrate?
That's a complex issue.
It is.
But one thing is clear, Halloween in China.
Yeah.
It's become much more than costumes and candy.
Yeah.
It's a lens through which we can see those bigger political and social dynamics at play in the country.
It's like this seemingly harmless holiday has become a stage for these bigger issues.
And it's not just about abstract ideas either. This crackdown has real consequences for people.
Of course.
Think about all the people who are excited for Halloween, wanting to express themselves with their costumes, have fun with their friends. Their plans were disrupted. Their freedom to celebrate was taken away.
Yeah.
All because of the sensitivity to anything that might challenge the status quo.
It's a shame. The New York Times describes some scenes that are almost absurd. Police escorting a giant poop emoji out of a park. People dressed as superheroes being pushed into vans. It's almost funny,
Yeah,
but also really unsettling.
I know. That contrast between the costumes and candy and the heavy-handed response, it really shows you how seriously they take any potential threat to their control.
Even something like Halloween.
Even Halloween.
It makes you think about the long-term impact, too, of living in a society like that, where even Halloween is under such scrutiny.
That's a really important point. It's not just about the restrictions themselves. It's about the message they send. A message of conformity, of self-censorship, a narrowing space for personal expression and freedom.
And this isn't just about what's happening to people
Yeah.
on an individual level. This whole Halloween crackdown could have a bigger impact when it comes to cultural exchange between China and the rest of the world.
Yeah, you're right. If China keeps going down this road and restricting or even like sanitizing influences from other cultures, it could create a greater sense of isolation.
It's like taking a step back from that globalized world that China has benefited from in many ways.
Exactly.
So what started as a crackdown on Halloween costumes might actually signal a much bigger shift in how China interacts with the rest of the world.
It's definitely something to keep an eye on. The government's actions suggest a growing desire to control, not just physical spaces, but the flow of culture and ideas.
The Times of India article also mentioned the economic impact, too. Bar and restaurant owners were hit hard by the restrictions. Some said their business just plummeted compared to last year's Halloween.
Right. It adds another layer to the whole situation. The government might say these restrictions are about stability and order, but there are unintended consequences for businesses and the economy in general.
Yeah, it's like we're looking at this tangled web. You've got the government focused on control, but then you have individuals who just want to express themselves, connect with the world, and caught in the middle are businesses trying to navigate this increasingly restrictive environment.
It's complicated for sure, but I think what's become really clear during this deep dive is that Halloween in China, it's not just about Halloween anymore. It's a way to understand the bigger picture, the political and social forces at work.
Absolutely. It really shows how something lighthearted can reveal so much about a place. But before we get too lost in the big picture, I wanted to go back to something specific about this year's crackdown. The detail in the New York Times about police targeting people based on their costumes. That really stuck with me.
Yeah, it shows how focused they are on controlling any outward expression, anything that doesn't conform. And remember, we're not even talking about political costumes. This was people dressed as superheroes, cartoon characters, even a poop emoji.
Right. It's like they were trying to enforce a certain look, erase anything that might be seen as weird or different.
Exactly. It raises questions about how aesthetics are used in social control.
Like how much power should a government have over how people look in public? It's a bit unsettling.
It is a question that societies everywhere grapple with. But in China, where the government already has so much control, this issue of personal appearance takes on a whole new meaning.
And it's not just about how things look. It's about what those choices represent.
Yeah, exactly. In this case, Halloween costumes, even the harmless ones, could be seen as symbols of Western influence, of individualism, or even rebellion against social norms.
And that's something the Chinese government, especially under President Xi Jinping, seems determined to suppress.
It seems their vision for China prioritizes conformity and cultural homogeneity over individual expression and diversity.
Which is such a contrast to last year, when they actually praised the Halloween celebrations as a sign of cultural tolerance.
Yeah, that change in attitude is pretty remarkable. It suggests that even a small amount of tolerance for anything outside the norm has vanished in just 1 year.
Wow. It's like a window of openness slammed shut.
And that's not a good sign
Right.
for anyone who values freedom of expression and the
Right.
open exchange of cultures.
So where does this leave Halloween in China? Will it just become another casualty of the government's tightening grip?
It's hard to say for sure, but this year's events don't paint a very optimistic picture.
It's hard to imagine it going back to that carefree celebration it was.
Unless there's a major shift in the government's approach, which doesn't seem likely right now.
It's a disappointing reality
Yeah.
for anyone who saw Halloween as a way to build bridges,
Yeah.
a night of fun that could transcend those divisions.
Instead, it's become another symbol of the growing gap between China and the West, a reminder of the challenges of cultural exchange.
And while Halloween might seem like a trivial thing to some, the implications of this crackdown reach far beyond costumes and candy.
You're absolutely right. This story shows how seemingly small events can give us insights into larger trends and tensions. It raises questions about globalization, about the balance between freedom and control, and how we can understand different cultures.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
So for our listeners,
Yeah.
what are the key takeaways from our deep dive into Halloween in China?
Well, first, it's important to understand that even seemingly harmless events can become very politicized, especially in places where freedom of expression is limited. Halloween became a flashpoint for anxieties in China.
And it shows that even in a globalized world, local contexts and politics will always shape how we experience culture.
Exactly. Second, the Chinese government under President Xi seems to be taking a more assertive approach to controlling not just physical spaces, but the cultural landscape too. The Halloween crackdown is just one example.
And finally, I think this story reminds us that the struggle between individual freedom and state control, it's ongoing. It's happening all over the world.
And it's a struggle that demands our attention and a willingness to stand up for openness, tolerance, and the free exchange of ideas.
Well said. This has been a fascinating deep dive, and honestly, a bit unsettling. But as always, knowledge is power, and our listeners now have a much deeper understanding.
Hopefully it will spark some conversations and encourage further exploration.
Absolutely. So to wrap things up, I'm going to leave our listeners with a final thought. In a world that's increasingly interconnected, how do we balance the desire for cultural exchange and understanding with the need to respect local values and sensitivities? And where do we draw the line when it comes to freedom of expression? In a world where governments are getting better at controlling information and shaping narratives.
Those are tough questions,
Yeah,
but important ones to consider.
they are. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
And, again, thanks for joining us on We Talk English.